Hi, everybody. It's Yafa Luria, and I want to welcome you to this webinar, Creating Screen Rules for Neurodivergent Kids and Teens. Um, while I'm going through the introduction, if you guys would write in the chat box, which is, you can activate that below, um, how old your kids are, or the child of focus, so to speak, and what conditions or what diagnoses he or she has, just so I know like who I'm talking to, basically. Um, okay, so I've started the recording and it will be posted later today. You will get an email that later today also that has the recording. At the end of this seminar, I want to invite you to join me for this class that is just, I mean, heavenly. I know that's an exaggeration, obviously, but I love this class. The people that take it love this class. It's just, it, I'm always refining it, and it is refined to such a like just beautiful place now where people can get so much more help than they could before. So I'll tell you about that at the end of the video. And if you want to find out about it now, just fast forward the video. All right, so let us get started. All right, so here's me. This is the picture on the left. I was almost 4. And the picture on the right, I'm guessing 16, but 16. Yeah, it could be 16. I got my braces off when I was 16. So they did it later back then. Wow, you can still see all the freckles. So if you don't mind, I'm just going to tell you a little bit about myself. I have ADHD and sensory processing issues. Um, I was not diagnosed until I was 23. So it's almost been 40 years. That is crazy. It's amazing. So um, when I was a kid and I was undiagnosed, I got in trouble fairly often, but I thought of myself like I couldn't figure it out because I thought I was a good kid. I mean, I knew other kids were better behaved than I was, but like when my parents would say, you don't follow our instructions, I would just think, I follow every single one of them. That was my perception. So I didn't think of myself as a bad kid. I had no idea why I was getting in trouble, honestly. Um, like every morning I would plan to be good. Today I'm going to be good. Um, and then the next thing I know, it was like, oh, you're in for recess or something like that. And I just couldn't figure out how to get from point A to point B. Like, how did I get from I'm going to do a good job today, not going to get in trouble, to getting in trouble anyway? And I didn't really understand this part. And a lot of kids and parents don't understand how they get from A to B, point A to point B. And so part of what I do is explain to parents how that happens and how they can help their kids become more aware of themselves and how to um, take care of themselves uh, in a more proactive way instead of just reacting to things and not knowing why. They can learn more about themselves and be proactive. So I was diagnosed and I became a teacher. Well, I was a teacher already, um, but when I was diagnosed, so this is, I think, kind of interesting. My parents didn't believe, or my mother didn't believe, that I had what was then called minimal brain dysfunction. So I was actually diagnosed with minimal brain dysfunction, which is ADHD, just the name they used back then. So my parents, lest you think it that you're a unique situation, or why didn't you notice it, or why didn't you get help earlier, or anything like that. Um, my parents were both psychologists. My father worked for a think tank that was run by, well, the big director was also the dean of education at UCLA. And my father was one of the directors of the program. He was the director of research and development. And every TA that was a TA at my school was a lab school for UCLA, so laboratory school. So everybody that was a TA would go to my school to do their teacher assistantship. Not everybody, but a lot of them. So, and the principal of my school was a friend of ours, because it's all tied together. She was getting her PhD in the Department of Education at UCLA. And then we had another friend who was, so I was surrounded by psychologists and educators, and nobody thought, they thought I was being willful. So even when professionals can take a look at somebody, it doesn't mean that they will recognize what's going on. And especially then, because back then, people knew about it. It's just that it was more directed, like most of the literature was about juvenile delinquents, which I was pretty much a juvenile delinquent. I just wasn't caught. Since then, I have definitely made amends to the people that I harmed. It was mostly stores and stealing. So I paid them back, made my amends. So it knowing how to raise a child with a neurodivergent brain is not dependent on how many degrees you have, what the degrees are, how much knowledge you have, how many books you've read, how much education you have. It's not dependent on that. It's dependent on, in my opinion, on your willingness to keep learning. There's always more stuff to learn. And I believe that this is a great environment to learn in, that it's important to learn with an expert, not just with books. I prefer learning from an expert, where I can talk to that person. So I was a teacher and a school counselor for 35 years, and over 35 years. And now I'm an ADHD coach. I've been an ADHD coach since 2006. I've had this business. So if you see a similarity between me and your kids, it's not by accident. A lot of parents will call me and say, my daughter does this or my son does this. And I'm like, I totally get it. Like, that was me. And so I decided to use this information and my experience, both professional and personal, to help families. I've been working with kids with neurodivergent minds since 1989. Even before, when I was doing student teaching, I did tend to have I did tend to be assigned classes where there were behavior problems. And I like those kids. What can I say? Um, so, so I was teaching and I was a school counselor, and I've been doing this for a really long time. And now I want to help you. So let's move along. Now, Amy Amy went over a lot in her webinar. If you attended or if you heard the recording, she did a lot on how to protect kids. That's not what this webinar is exactly. We're not going to talk about specific protections. What we're going to talk about is how you set up a rule structure or a system when screens are such a volatile topic in most homes. I don't think there has never been a parent that came to me and said, oh, my problem, my kid or my teen does not have a problem with screens. Most every parent is pretty worried about screen use and that sort of thing. So you are not alone by any means. So there's a lot to go through, and I want to make sure there's time for questions. So, so the first question is: I'm asking, are screens really a problem? So let's say it's yes. Why would they be a problem? Okay, well they're very distracting from reality. They may be focused, but it's hyper focus, as we can see, which allows them to distance themselves from what's going on outside. It's almost like having an inner world. And that is one of the reasons why they may have a tantrum when they're asked to get off, because you're pulling them not just from the game, but you're pulling them out of their inner world and out into the real world. And their inner world is a really safe place. I'm not talking about being crazy or schizophrenic or anything like that. What I'm talking about is a place where our ideas are roaming around and developing and appearing for the first time. And it's one of the cool things, actually, about having a neurodivergent brain, that I think it's cool to see things differently. It's like playtime for me most of the time. So that's one of the reasons that kids will have a tantrum or melt down, is because we're actually pulling them away from a couple of things. It doesn't look like it should be a big deal to a lot of parents, but it is a big deal to the kids. And remember that they aren't as emotionally mature as their peers. Most kids that are neurodivergent are, as far as emotional maturity, they tend to be 2 to 3 years behind their peers. They will catch up. I like to say we are late bloomers, not non-bloomers. And then, of course, we know that it's a problem because there are dangerous websites. And how do we know our kid isn't going to find those? And then, like I said, it's emotionally draining. It's very emotionally draining to be on the computer for a long time, or to be watching TV for a long time. So in that way, yes, screens are a problem, but they're also not a problem. They also have some benefits. One of the biggest ones you'll hear from kids is that their friends are on whatever, texting or on a game, and that's how they connect with their friends. And that is the way it is. There, you can ask them to use a phone like a phone call, but that's like asking somebody who had a television that they can write a letter to somebody, or had a phone. You can write a letter to somebody. You're more likely to call somebody than to write a letter, and you're more likely to text somebody than necessarily make that call. At least the kids are. So friendship is one of the things that's really important to consider when you're thinking about screen rules or tech rules. It is also a way for kids to self-soothe. There are a lot healthier ways to self-soothe, um, but it is soothing. There is something magical, I guess you'd say, that happens to their heads. I mean, it's a hit of dopamine, and dopamine is awesome. Like dopamine is its own drug, and it's made in your body. All you have to do is like try to make it produce more. And screens are a way to do that. You can also take drugs to do it, but your kids aren't taking drugs. They're doing computers to get that hit. Um, it's good for hand and eye coordination. It's good for strategizing also. And as such, it is educational in some ways. Depending on what the screen is, it's more or less educational, and what channel you're turned to or what program you're listening to. But so there are some good things about screens. And if you try to set up an argument with your kids, you will hear them say some of these things. This is their defense. Um, oh, let me just say, if you can put questions in the chat box, that would be awesome. I would ask that if you want to talk to any of the people via the chat box, that you put it on a specific person, not to everyone or to me, but put it to a specific person. And the reason for that is because I have ADHD, it's going to be way easier for me to read the questions if that's all there is. I don't have to sift through other stuff. Free lesson. So I looked at this article that's highlighted here. I think if you put your pointer on it, you can just check that off, or sorry, you can click on it and you can get right there and you can read that later. It's got a good sign. It's got a pretty good list of signs of screen addictions, but the problem is, and this is true of many books and magazine articles, even the ones about ADHD, is that they're not really geared to our kids. Even if they say they are, the presentation might not be spot on. They may be suggesting something, but they're missing this whole chunk that's really important. I, I believe that there aren't a lot of people that understand ADHD the way I do. I mean, they understand it in their own way, but my approach is very different. First of all, I have a positive approach, but even among people with a positive approach, my way of explaining things to parents is much less therapy speak, I guess you'd say. It's much more based on my personal experience as a person growing up with ADHD, but also all those years that I spent teaching neurodivergent kids in school. Those were the kids that I was given. I don't know why. They didn't know I had ADHD. I didn't tell people for bosses for a really long time, but I always got those kids that had some disadvantage as far as learning. And my classes, that's all I had. My classes were full of them. And so what I learned was different than somebody who studies it, because they want to be an ADHD coach, or a doctor who only knows a certain segment of what's going on, and they're going to, let's say, prescribe, and they can talk about certain experiences. But I was with your kids day in and day out for more than an hour in some situations, for more than just an appointment. I had to learn how to make learning fun for them, how to make all kinds of to-dos fun or more interesting. Um, or how to be honest when it wasn't interesting. I had to take them, or I had to try to take them, or try to make a safe space for them to go from like this sort of boredom and disgust and anger and self-pity and disappointment to a place where they feel really good about themselves. And sometimes they made that transition during the class period. Sometimes it happened overnight, but I got to see what works and what doesn't work, and I got to see it day in and day out. So um, I I just love what I do. It's not important, I think, for this particular webinar, but it's hard for me to not say that. Okay, so let's look at these. So here are the signs. The ones in gray, I think, are iffy. So the first one is your child isn't interested in anything else. I mean, if they're not interested in anything else, that would be a good sign, yeah. But, you know, because they are getting more than other people, they're getting that hit of dopamine from like getting a response from a friend, from a text, or playing a game. Because they're getting that hit and their dopamine levels probably are low, um, it's a different experience for neurodivergent kids than it is for neurotypical kids. Um, Also, it's all they talk about. That's not uncommon with neurodivergent kids. They get stuck on a topic and they talk about it a lot. Same with your child has a meltdown or tantrum when it's time to get off. Yeah, I mean, there are ways to handle these, by the way, that are non-confrontational. But but it doesn't surprise me that when kids are hyper focused and you break that focus up, or somebody breaks that focus, they're going to spin out. You know, they're going to get mad, or they're going to like just panic almost. So the first three, I think, are not necessarily signs of addiction. And I also want to say, I wouldn't use the word addiction loosely. I get a lot of emails saying, you know, I think my kid is addicted to screens, or my kid is addicted to screens. That's pretty much how people refer to it. I would not use the word addicted because it's a very specific medical diagnosis or assessment. And using a word with a negative connotation makes it really difficult to see anything, not just anything positive, but it makes it difficult for you to enter into a conversation with your child in a positive way because you're focused on addiction, addiction, addiction. Your child isn't. So you're speaking like two different languages when you try to talk to your child about screens, and in your mind, you're thinking they're addicted. So I would be careful about using that word. But these last three, I think, are good indicators because they're pretty much indicators of all addictions. They won't engage in school activities, meaning uh, like they won't go to school. It's not just I don't want to do my homework, which could have several reasons behind that. But you know, I don't want to go to school. I just want to sit here and play all day. Or I feel sick and I can't go to school, and then they play online all day. That's another thing. Also, addictions can cause problems in relationships. And I say outside relationships because I'm talking about the relationships they have not with their friends on screens. Um, but other relationships with their parents, with their siblings, with their grandparents, aunts and uncles, teacher, sports coach, whoever that might be. And if they're deceptive about it. I won't go into this super long story, but I basically had this client who was full of anxiety, and he used to play a lot of, I think it was Wii or Xbox, I'm not sure. So his parents took the controllers and locked them up in a safe. And so he would buy more controllers, clever, and they would take those away and lock them in the safe. Well, one day they're going to open the safe because he wants to play a game. And so they're going to give him the controller. And they hear this really funny noise and they turn around. By the way, the safe was behind a painting in the dining room, embedded in the wall. And they turn around and they look at this at the dining table, and there's a camera attached to a chair right across from the safe. And it was movement activated. And so when they came into the room, who I don't remember if it was the father or the mother, it activated. So that's what they heard because he was trying to get the combination of the safe. That's a problem. That's a problem. Okay, let's take a breath. I really liked it when Amy did breaths. So, this can be a super intense topic because it is worrisome to parents. And I understand that, but let's try to find a way to look at it that's not as dire. Okay, so let's get down to it. How do you create rules that avoid the power struggle? It's not super hard. The hardest part is for the parents because you need to let go of control, I'll say. You are the leaders of the family, but a good leader is not simply someone who says, do this, do that, and then everybody goes, yes, sir. I mean, yeah, that happens in the military, and probably with good reason, because you have a bunch of guns and tanks and there could be war going on, so you need to practice being obedient. But remember that those obedient soldiers are not allowed to think for themselves, for the most part, certainly not when they're growing up, meaning in training. When they get old, when not older, but when they get a higher rank, that's one thing. But so when we try to treat our kids by controlling them, we're turning them into people who don't think for themselves because that's not available to them. So the best thing you can do is lead and make it clear by your posture or by your facial expressions, or just trust that they know you're the leader, but that you're not going to have an agenda that they do what you want them to do, period. If you come up with rules and that's your agenda, that I want to have rules that they will follow, that's not realistic. And that's a big reason why things may not be smooth at home. We have a lot of rules. The government imposes rules on us. Some of us follow them and some of us don't. Just having the rules doesn't mean people will follow them, even adults. There are plenty of us that drive over the speed limit. So having rules is not a guarantee. It's just not. So let's look for cooperation instead of compliance or control. We can get cooperation for sure. So one of the things is to do it together. There are certain rules that I believe should be put together or should be decided upon by parents alone. Those have to do with safety. Parents are in charge of safety. In this situation, because it is volatile, getting input from your child is a very empowering thing for your child. And many neurodivergent kids have leadership qualities. They just don't look like leadership qualities until you pick them apart. Um, thinking outside of the box is one of them. Um, Breaking with authorities or authority figures. To be a leader of a country, you need to have your own ideas about how you're going to work within the system to affect helpful change, healing change for the most people. Um, but you have to be able to think in a lot of different ways. Okay, you also want to have your rules applied to everyone in the family, including you. And we're going to talk about that later. I'm trying to think. I believe we're going to talk about that later, yes. But that's really important because one of the problems that parents have with neurodivergent kids is that the typical parents are in charge, do what I say, does not work with them, period. I know you've seen it, so I'm just telling you, you don't need to keep doing it because it doesn't work. If you put the fear of God in them, yeah, it'll work. But I don't think that's a good way to relate to your kids. You want to connect, not scare them away. The parents need to actually follow the rules and follow through on positive and negative consequences. Now, I look at consequences as a cause and effect. If you do this, here's a positive consequence. But if you do this, here's a negative consequence. It's like cause and effect. I do not look at it as punishment. Um, and your consequences don't have to be punishing. I look at it more like you're restoring the balance. It's not, she hit me, so I'm going to hit her, or she hit me, so I'm getting mom or dad to hit him or her. So those are 4 things you need. Now, I say this a lot. Ultimately, the right rules are rules that work for you and your family. If you cannot uphold a rule, and there are all kinds of reasons why you might not be able to, so there's no shame in that. You should have rules that you can follow and follow through on. And if you can't, just don't make it a rule. Not everybody has to have the same rules. So let me give you some examples here. These are things to think about. Are there different rules for different types of screen or technology? Um, so um, it depends on the screen that's bugging you, I guess you would say. But some screens, like if they're reading a book on a Kindle, that may not be as dire as them hacking a game system or something like that. So you probably want to differentiate a bit. Now, when you're making rules for screens, I would say limit it to about 4 or 5. The more rules you come up with, the more confusing it's going to be for your kids. And you have to adhere to them. It's way easier to adhere to 4 or 5 rules than it is to adhere to 10. You know, when are the best screen times and the worst screen times? So you have to look at your schedule and your kids' schedule. Um, are there times when maybe they can have free screens? I worked with a family that had free screen Fridays, and so they'd get home at 3, and from 3 to 9 p.m. they could be on their screens, and that was the only time in the week that they had free screens. All their other times were predetermined. Should you have a base amount of time? Like, should you say, and I would say yes, should you say that there's a base amount of time? Let's say it's a half an hour or an hour. I don't know, has to work for your family. And remember, these rules are for you also. So that's really important. because it's going to make a huge difference. Um, so some families have like okay, the base amount of time is a half an hour a day, but you can earn extra time by doing certain chores, like harder chores, not the typical ones that they're assigned, but something harder. Or you can, um, or you can attach grades to it, for instance. I had a client where um, literally the GPA was broken up in, and so it was like if you have this percentage, between this percentage and this percentage, you get this much free time, and you have to turn your screen at this time, this, and that sort of thing. And it was based on the grade point average, and there couldn't be any D's or F's. If it was a below, I think it was a 72 or 74%, then they didn't have free screen time. But they could take a break to text their friends, one break. This puts the responsibility in the child's lap, which is really convenient. But somebody has to be home to, make sure the screen is turned in and make sure, how long they're using it. And so in some families, that's hard to do. So that's not a good rule. If you're a single parent and you work till 8 p.m., like one of my clients does, telling them they can only be on their screens from like 3 to 4 probably won't work, because how are you supposed to check in? You can there are devices where you can see if they're on or not, but that doesn't mean that they're going to stop. You can call them and say, I see you're on the computer, it's time for you to get off, but that doesn't mean they will, as opposed to when you're home and you actually like take their phone away or something. So maybe there are free days, like I mentioned. Where are screens allowed in your house or wherever and not allowed? Is it okay to have screens or technology at dinner? What about Alexa, which you may be in charge of? So there are a lot of possibilities. And the main thing is to not have rules that don't make sense or rules that you can't follow through on. And don't make up rules just because you're pissed at your kid because they did something or other. So where are screens allowed? Some families say that you can't go on a screen unless you're with somebody else, like you have to have your brother at the same time. Some people don't allow screens in bedrooms. Some families, lots of families don't allow screens at the dinner table, but they can listen to music with Alexa, because it's nothing. Alexa isn't taking your visual time or visual reality away from you. You're just listening to music on Alexa. If you have Alexa, which I don't and probably never will. So you don't have to have Alexa. That's not what I'm saying. And then what about family time? Like lots of movies, like families like to watch a video or something, a movie. And so you want to often make an exception for family time. Also, this is really key. A lot of parents will say, well, the biggest thing, the thing that we fight about the most is the whatever, phone, Xbox, tablet, whatever it is. And what I want to say about that is, depending on how broken your family is and how miserable everybody is, you may not want to make a rule around that thing, because you may be just creating even more tension. So this is why I wrote, is this a hill I'm willing to die on? And is this a hill that you're willing to have your children die on? Meaning, this could stir up more trouble than it's worth. I give the example of, this was a school rule. I mean, this was a school setting. I would not do this in a home setting. Like with my kids or grandkids, this would not go. But that's why it's important for you to look at your own family and not other people's family, because comparing is despairing. That's what I have to say about that. You don't have to measure up to anybody else. That is not your job. Your job is to like love your family and support them and guide them and, you know, teach them basically. So, so I used to teach a class of, they were called emotionally and behaviorally disturbed. And this was middle school. So middle school students. Pretty much every day, at least once a day, somebody would call me a fat, ugly bitch. And I decided that that was a hill I wasn't willing to die on, because if I made a deal out of it, that meant I was taking class time. Did I want to sacrifice my connection with them just for this particular rule? So most of the time I ignored it. Sometimes I would say, well, that's mean, or something like that. And basically the other kids, it was only 2 kids that did it. And usually there was another kid that would go, you know, she's not going to react. So why do you say it? You know, so, so that was kind of interesting how they, you know, protected me at times. It just wasn't a hill I wanted to die on, because I knew that they were in pain, and it wasn't my job to make their pain worse. So that's an example of, you know, maybe there's something in your family that is causing a lot of disagreement, and maybe you will make a rule about it, and maybe you won't make a rule about it. But it's something to at least think about. Are you creating a situation, you know, is your family intact enough to have risky rules, or do you have some healing to do first? Also, what is your work schedule? Like we talked about this a little bit. Can you follow through on your rules with like your work schedule or your religious schedule or your holiday schedule or the fact that you travel a lot for your work? These are all things and more that will inform what rules and what parameters are acceptable in your family. And then, you know, also take into consideration extracurricular activities. Some families, they're going to Chinese school or Hebrew school, and they've got Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts, and they've got who knows what else, team sports. So kids are really busy. So it's important to take into consideration a lot of these things. If you have you know, you can use screens between 7 and 8, but between 7 and 8, your child is playing lacrosse. I guarantee they're not going to be happy with that rule, because the only time they can be on a screen is when they can't be on a screen. So these are things to think about. Okay, so here's a script. Let me just look at the time. Okay, so here's a script to help you. You start with an apology about your mistake, not about them. So you're not going to start with, you know, I know this is hard for you, or I know that, you know, this is a problem for you. You start by saying, you know, it's our job to do the best we can. And screens has been a really volatile topic or a really dramatic topic. We want to apologize for whatever drama we've put into the situation. That was our mistake. We should not be putting drama into a situation. That's not what parents do. We've been taking some classes, so you can like say this is a class. We've been taking some classes and we want to make some changes that will be for all of us, not just you. This is for all of us. We will all participate in these changes. That is so important. I cannot even tell you. I keep saying it, but it's really important. And let me say, I know somebody has a question about that, which is, the question is, if we go to, basically, if we go to bed at um, 10 and our kid goes to bed at 8, are we supposed to give up our technology at 7 or 8 also? The idea isn't that it's precisely equal, but if your child has a turn in time, then you have a turn in time. If now in some families, that turn in time is not nighttime. I had a client where she worked for a company in China, but she lived in Seattle. So she needed her technology all night long. I mean, she started work at about midnight. So what that exactly looks like depends on your family. Some families don't want to have that rule. So their rule is because their kids are a certain age, or they know they're not going to follow through on it. And so they say something more like everybody has to be in their room by 10 o'clock, or everybody has to be in their room, but they can't have their phones, or something like that, something that is possible for all of you to do. Now, then you're going to say, we would like to know what you think is important about your screen time and what worries you about changing the rules. Now, if they start talking to you about what it is, you're going to say things like, oh, that's interesting, or I didn't know you felt that way, or thank you for explaining that to me. This is the only agenda you have right now, is to connect with them. You're not going to say that's BS. You're not going to say, yeah, no. You're not going to be sarcastic. Your job, your only agenda is to connect with them. That is very important. And so that means you're going to listen more than you're going to talk. And you'll see how well it works. So after that, you can pause, ask them, like ask your family, let's take a break. Let's come up with some rules that we think are reasonable around screens. Now, it's actually, when kids get to make the screen rules, it's very rare that they will come up with, we should have, free screens all day, every day. It will happen in some families if one of the children has oppositional defiant disorder and feels singled out as the weirdo or the problem of the family, then you're going to get pushback. But oppositional defiant disorder on its own does not mean that they're going to have a problem with coming up with reasonable rules. By itself, that doesn't mean that way. But like I said, if they've been singled out as the problem child, they're going to play that role that's been given to them. They know what reasonable rules are because they're in school and because they know that people have rules about screens. One time I had a really stubborn client, and I said, okay, if you can find me an article by a doctor or a therapist that says that it is okay for kids to have unlimited screen time, then you can have unlimited screen time. There isn't an article that says that. It says, usually the article, and the one he picked to show me said, Kids can have screen time after their homework's done, after school, after they've seen their friends, after they've exercised, and as long as they're getting good sleep. And there still has to be a turn-in time. And, and I was like, you see what this says, right? Because this was his proof. So there just aren't articles written by doctors or therapists. So, and then you come back, and maybe you come back in a half an hour or an hour, or maybe you guys come back in together in like the next evening. But you want to compare your ideas, ask for input, think about compromise. You don't want to, I define compromising as nobody gets what they want, but everybody's okay with it. This is an opportunity for leadership for your child. It's also an opportunity for you to be a leader. And so think about really, how can I lead and be connected? Because a lot of kids, neurodivergent kids in particular, and teens in particular, they're either feeling connected or they're not. So it's an important decision that you make when you say connection is first. That doesn't mean discipline has no part. It doesn't mean that at all. What it does mean is that you are able to look at your role not with fear, not with worry, not with control, not with anger, not with disappointment, because your job is to connect, and none of those things will connect to your kid. So it's possible to give rules without yelling, without nagging, without begging. Totally possible. Talk about that soon. I will talk about that soon. Okay, here's another beautiful picture from Bellingham. Take a deep breath. Okay. Okay, so here's what we're going to talk about. I'm having an upcoming behavior workshop. I'm just looking at the time. It starts next week, July 15th to August 25th. Like I said earlier, I love this program. And the nicest people participate in this program. Like, it is so heartwarming because, they're frustrated for sure, but they're so willing to learn, so committed to getting things right with their kids and turning things around. It's heartwarming. It's like, for me and for them, it's kind of indescribable, except to say having Yafa available as much as she is a godsend. So here's how it works. First, you get the actual program, which is 6 video lessons. There are worksheets, and there are about 12 or 13 examples of behavior plans from families that I've actually worked with. But obviously their names aren't there. There's a weekly session. If your chat box is covering up the words, you can shift that. So there's a weekly instructional session on Wednesdays at 12 p.m. Pacific. And it will be recorded if you can't make a session. It'll be recorded and sent to you. It'll be recorded and sent to every participant, whether you're there or not. Then we also have a half an hour, 40 minutes of Q&A sessions. Those are on Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday. My days off are Friday and Saturday. So, and you can come on every day. You can come on once a week. You can do twice a week, one week, and nothing the next week. You showing up to Q&A sessions is totally up to you, but I will be here available to you. So And that is really a huge plus for so many people, because if something happens, it's almost like getting immediate, like in the moment help, because they can say, well, something happened this morning or something happened last night. What do you think about this? And so it's like getting private coaching, except there are people listening because it's a group. You can also ask questions ahead of time and email them to me, and then I'll answer them in the Q&A sessions, make a video and send it to you. And I have a reduced rate right now. It's available until Monday. Yeah, it's available till Monday. It's $59 for the 7 weeks and all of this stuff. It's going up to $75, which is also a really good price, but it will be going up to $75 on Monday. So if you're interested in this, I have the URL right here at the bottom underneath the woman's head. Now, if there are any questions, I would love to take some questions. If you want to type them in the chat box, great. If you're on the phone, you can just ask them. You don't have to say your name, but you can if you want to. I'll just wait. So while I'm waiting, I'll just tell you that the other thing that's good about the program, the behavior workshop, is we deal a lot with emotional regulation and executive function, because my behavior system takes those really important things into consideration and puts them, like, it's like you get a behavior program that will not just improve behavior, but increase executive function and increase emotional regulation, because it's not really worth anything otherwise. You know, it can't just be one thing. The program also is not a one size fits all. It has a structure, like it has a basic structure that you do things in this order and you don't skip anything because it might be uncomfortable. That is set in stone. But within that structure, like I showed you, there are different possibilities depending on your family. You could have everybody turn in their screens at 8. You could have everybody not turn them in. You could make apple pie. I mean, it's really dependent on so many things. It's kind of unreal how many things there are that really make your family unique. So, who has questions? I don't have questions, which is sad. Yes, the recording is available. I will send it out to, I'll send it to, I'll send it to the people who got the email in the first place. And then I'll give it also to Amy in case you came on from Amy and not from me. So there are 2 ways you'll be able to get that. Okay, so remember that the cost goes up on Monday. So you want to, I'll say, well, here's the link. You could click on it right now. It's $59. It'll go up to $75 on Monday. All right, guys. Thank you for joining me. I hope you got something out of this. You can wait if you want and not present this yet. If you decide to take the workshop, we can work more on this. You can consult with me about your particular family. And you can hear some things that other people struggle with also, as far as these kind of rules. Or you can just take this and start implementing your screen rules just based on what I taught you today. Either way is fine with me. Um, I just want you to get the help that you want and need. So thank you everybody so much for taking the time to join me. And I hope I get to see you, talk to you again. All right. Bye, everybody. Oh, still